On the morning after Labor Day, a bright orange citation fluttered on the Ellisons' mailbox, accusing them of misusing their own driveway. The sun had barely cleared the tops of the saguaros when Ellie stepped outside in her sandals, cradling the creaky old mailbox door with one hand and reaching in with the other. She expected the usual, local grocery ads, a flyer from the Methodist church, and maybe a coupon booklet. But instead, she saw it, bright orange, pinned under the lid like a warning flare. She paused, blinking against the sunlight. Her fingers brushed the stiff edge and tugged it free. The wind caught the corner and flipped it open. Notice of violation, non-compliant use of residential driveway, Section 3.4. At first, she thought it was a prank. Some leftover joke from yesterday's barbecue. But the language was too dry, too precise. There was no smiley face, no signature in Sharpie. Just bold type, a citation number, and a due date circled in red. Ellie recalled her dad once saying, "The worst kind of power is the one that wears a smile." She stood frozen for a moment, letting the warm air swirl around her bare legs. Across the street, Mrs. Patel was still sweeping confetti off her porch. Someone's leftover bunting flapped weakly from a lamppost. The air smelled like grilled corn and baked bricks. Everything should have felt sleepy, sun-baked, slow. But the paper in her hand buzzed with quiet hostility. Inside, Mark was still in his weekend jeans, sipping from a chipped navy mug. Nora had her reading glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a home sale brochure. "Did we leave something out?" Ellie asked, walking in. "Or, park wrong?" She held out the paper. Mark took it, read silently, and then sat a little straighter. "Driveway violation," he said aloud. "We had 3 cars. Maybe 4. 5, Nora said without looking up. Jenny's boyfriend stayed late. And your sister's friend came back for her phone." Mark reread the form. Section 3.4. Never heard of it. That HOA packet was thicker than my first mortgage, Nora said dryly. Who actually reads those cover to cover? Mark stood, walked to the built-in cabinet by the stairs, and pulled out a white binder covered in dust. Apparently, we should have. They sat around the dining table, flipping page after page. Ellie skimmed for Section 3.4. There it was, buried deep: temporary overnight parking, limit 2 vehicles per residential driveway unless pre-authorized by HOA board. Pre-authorized? Mark echoed. We hosted a family barbecue, not a used car expo. A ding interrupted them. Nora opened her email and tilted the screen. Subject, HOA notice, Karen Whitmore. She clicked. Dear homeowner. Please be advised that non-compliant use of your driveway on the evening of September 4th violates Section 3.4 of Vista Verde's covenant. A fine of $75 will be issued unless waived upon review. Karen Whitmore, HOA President. There was no greeting. No signature line. Just that clinical tone, like an invoice from a cold dentist. Ellie frowned. She's the new HOA president, right? Mark nodded. Moved in 2 months ago. Blonde, always in yoga pants. I waved once. She didn't wave back. Ellie, Nora said, take a walk down the block. See if we're the only ones. 10 minutes later, Ellie returned. No other house had a ticket. Not the house with the camper van in the driveway. Not the one with a rusted trailer hitched to the back fence. Mark looked out the window, rubbing his temple. Selective enforcement. Classic. A knock at the door startled them. Mr. Grayson stood there, white hair slicked back, holding a paper plate of apple pie. Leftover from yesterday, he said. Too much sugar for me now, but figured you folks might want it. He paused, then added, saw the orange slip. Sorry about that. Nora sighed. Did you get one? Not this time, he said. But last month, I got one for leaving a garden hose uncoiled. I just used it. Hadn't even dried yet. He stepped inside when invited, glanced around the tidy room, then said softly, this HOA used to help. Mow a lawn for someone sick. Send cards if a spouse passed. It's changed. Later that evening, while Mark watered the front hedge, manually, now, an HOA newsletter pinged his inbox. He opened it by habit. Subject: Vista Verde Compliance Expansion. Dear homeowners. In order to preserve neighborhood integrity, Vista Verde will begin a landscape compliance initiative next week. All easements will be reviewed for safety, appearance, and compliance with Vista Verde's aesthetic standards. Karen's signature sat beneath it, crisp and centered. Mark stood at the edge of their front yard. The sun had dipped just far enough to stretch long shadows across the property line. He stared at the flagstone path that separated their yard from the slope behind it, a patch they'd landscaped themselves with mulch and native grass. She's not just coming for our driveway. She's coming for our property. 2 days after the citation, the Ellisons woke up to dry, cracking soil. Their water had been cut off. Nora stood at the kitchen sink, twisting the faucet handle once, then again, as if stubbornness might coax out a single drop. But nothing came, not even a sigh of pressure from the pipes. Outside the window, the morning light fell flat across their parched yard, casting long cracks between tufts of fading green. She checked the dishwasher, then the laundry room. Dry. Even the hose spigot out front gave nothing but a hollow click when she turned it. Her fingers tightened around the knob. No warning, she muttered. No notice. No overdue bill. Mark, halfway through his toast, set it down and wiped his fingers. Call the water company. Maybe it's a broken main. Nora was already dialing. Her voice dropped as she navigated the prompts, then lifted with a strained kind of calm. Yes, this is Nora Ellison, 221 Vista Loop. We seem to have lost all water service. A pause. Yes, we've checked. No leaks. No construction nearby. Another pause, and then a longer silence as her lips parted in disbelief. You're saying the shutoff request came from the HOA? She lowered the phone slowly and looked at Mark, eyes narrowed. They routed it through their authority. Said we were temporarily suspended for irrigation abuse under Community Regulation Clause 5.2. Mark stood. Irrigation abuse? We water twice a week. That's within state guidelines. An HOA Clause 5.2, Nora said, pulling the thick binder from the side cabinet. She flipped pages with controlled speed. Here it is: water use may be restricted in cases of noncompliance or over-irrigation. Vague. No thresholds, no measurement. Just discretionary enforcement. Her brow furrowed, and she read it again. It's the same vague language Karen used in the driveway citation. Ellie walked in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. No water? She asked. I tried to rinse my toothbrush and it just squeaked. Welcome to selective enforcement, Mark said quietly. Later that morning, Nora decided to take a walk down to Dolly's Diner, a squat brick building nestled between a hardware store and a closed-down video rental shop. She needed the kind of coffee that came in bottomless mugs and was poured by women who knew every regular's name. Inside, the scent of bacon hung in the air like a memory. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and ceiling fans turned slowly overhead. Nora slid into a booth near the back. A waitress with a name tag that read Pam filled her cup before she could ask. Rough morning? Pam asked gently. No water, Nora replied. Apparently, it's an HOA issue. Across the aisle, Mrs. Patel lifted her eyes from her teacup. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Mine too. Nora leaned forward. No notice. Mrs. Patel shook her head. I called the city. They said HOA authority under irrigation clause. Her eyes dropped to her plate. My roses are dying. 2 booths away, a familiar voice broke the hush. They're playing a dangerous game. Nora turned. Mr. Morales, retired district judge, was sipping coffee while highlighting a newspaper article with a felt pen. His eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. Selective service denial, he said. That's enforceable under state law. If it becomes a pattern, it's a civil rights issue. Mrs. Patel pressed her napkin into her lap. But who would believe us? It's just water. Morales set his cup down. Water's not optional in Arizona. By the time Nora returned home, a second notice had appeared taped to the side of their garage: improper irrigation compliance, $40 fine. In small print below, repeat violations may result in escalating penalties. Mark read it in silence. Ellie stepped closer and snapped a photo with her phone. We need to start tracking everything, she said. Photos, dates, emails. If they're making up rules, we need to show the pattern. Nora nodded slowly. Good thinking. Every incident. Every notice. Inside, Mark had his laptop open on the kitchen counter. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Clause 5.2, he muttered. Vague language, applied unevenly. It's the same trick in both notices. A ping announced a new email: Community Integrity, update from HOA President. Mark clicked. Karen's voice emerged in written form: calm, distant, corporate. Vista Verde aims to be a model community. Uncompliant residents risk cumulative consequences. He leaned back in his chair, the kitchen clock ticking louder with every second. He closed his laptop, eyes narrowed. She's using rules as weapons. It's time we read the fine print too. A new sign went up overnight: Community Beautification Zone, HOA reserved access. It stood inches from the Ellisons' fence line. Ellie spotted it first. The sign looked too clean, too square, as if it had been installed in the dark with perfect precision. White background, navy lettering, and the HOA's sunburst logo stamped at the bottom right. Beneath the sign, a cluster of bright orange stake flags had been driven deep into the gravel behind the fence, 5 in total, forming a straight line that sliced diagonally across the rear corner of their property. She stood on the back patio, still in pajamas, one slipper half on, hair pulled into a hasty ponytail. Mom, she called, voice tight. Nora appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. When she saw the sign, her brows dipped low. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she stepped off the patio and toward the fence, scanning the markers. They weren't here yesterday. Do they even have permission? Ellie asked. Nora didn't answer. Instead, she turned back inside and returned with her phone. She started snapping photos from different angles: close-ups of the stake flags, wide shots of the yard. She knelt to get a timestamp on the sprinkler timer box, then stood and muttered, "We log everything." That afternoon, Ellie sat on the back steps watching a small group of teens gather down the slope, near the shaded trail entrance where the community walking path met the wild grasses. Most of them she recognized from school. There was the lanky boy who always wore headphones, the girl who roller skated instead of walking. And among them, Samantha Whitmore. Alone, leaning against a crooked mesquite tree, flipping through a paperback book. Ellie was about to head inside when Samantha broke away from the group and walked toward the fence. She held up a book, Of Mice and Men, Ellie's copy. I borrowed this a few weeks ago, Samantha said quietly, slipping it through the gap in the gate. Ellie hesitated, then took it. You could have just left it at the porch. I thought it'd be polite, Samantha said, eyes flicking sideways toward the staked land. Besides, I needed a walk. Her voice was softer than usual. No sarcasm, no performative confidence. Just unease, like a radio dial turned slightly off station. Ellie followed her gaze. Do you know what this is about? Samantha shrugged, but her fingers twisted around the hem of her sleeve. They say it's for aesthetics. A new walking loop. Karen's big idea, connecting the back lots to the main park. Ellie glanced at her sharply. Karen. Not Mom. Samantha didn't answer. She stared at one of the stake flags, biting her lip. That land, Ellie said slowly, is ours. It's in our deed. Samantha finally met her eyes. I know. Before Ellie could say more, Samantha turned and walked back toward the group, shoulders hunched like the desert wind had grown colder. Later that day, flyers appeared in neighbors' mailboxes, notice of easement reassessment, Vista Pathway Project. The document was dressed up with architectural sketches, phrases like community enhancement and environmental harmony. But to Nora, it read like a land grab. She sat at the dining table surrounded by printed maps and the HOA charter, drafting a formal property challenge. At dusk, Mark arrived home and listened as Nora laid out the day's events. He didn't speak until she slid the flyer across the table. He read it once, then opened the thick HOA binder again. He moved methodically, flipping through with a lawyer's eye, until he paused near the back. There, he said, tapping the page. Shared easement adjustments require prior member approval by 2/3 vote. Signed ballots. Documented in minutes. Was there a vote? Nora asked. No, his tone was flat. There wasn't even a meeting. That evening, Ellie sat alone on the porch steps, watching shadows stretch across the yard. In the distance, sprinklers clicked on from a neighbor's lawn. The scent of damp earth drifted in, mixing with mesquite smoke from a distant grill. Her phone buzzed softly in her lap. A text from an unknown number. You didn't hear this from me. But your land is in the loan file. Karen beamed as the projector clicked to life, displaying a digital map that cut straight through the Ellisons' yard. The map glowed against the beige wall of the Vista Verde Community Hall. Blue lines marked proposed walkways, green shapes represented new, public green spaces. But what held everyone's attention was the thick purple stripe labeled Vista Pathway Access Corridor. It sliced directly through 3 backyards, including the Ellisons, like a knife across a birthday cake. Mark sat still. Nora leaned forward, squinting at the projection. Ellie, beside her, felt a slow burn rise from her chest to her cheeks. Karen Whitmore stood at the front, perfectly composed. Her cream blazer was crisp, her hair swept back with not a strand out of place. She held a sleek remote in one hand and clicked to the next slide, an animated rendering of a winding path lined with decorative lighting and artisan benches. We envision this as a transformative project, Karen said. A place where neighbors stroll, children play, and our property values rise. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The hall was mostly quiet. Rows of folding chairs groaned under the weight of silent residents. Some held HOA flyers, others clutched reusable grocery bags or folded hands tight in their laps. Ellie scanned the room and caught sight of Samantha seated alone near the back. Her arms were crossed, expression unreadable. Karen continued. We'll be finalizing the application to Verde Credit Union next week. Their backing will allow us to begin construction this fall. Mark stood. Calm, polite. Excuse me, he said, projecting just enough to carry across the room, I have a question. Karen blinked. Yes, Mr. Ellison. Mark nodded toward the screen. This map includes private property. Mine, specifically. When exactly was the vote to approve this reclassification? Karen kept her smile. As outlined in our development charter, Section 10.2 allows the board to propose community enhancements. The Pathway project is part of long-term planning. Mark held up a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. And Section 12.4 requires a 2/3 vote of homeowner approval for any easement reclassification. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen tilted her head. This is a preliminary phase. Community consultation is ongoing. Is there a record of ballots? Mark asked. Minutes from the vote? Karen shifted slightly behind the podium. We're still reviewing logistics. Judge Morales raised a hand. As a retired member of the state court, I'd like clarification. Has any formal vote been held? Karen's voice tightened. We are within the board's discretionary authority to pursue design concepts. But not to present them as approved, Mark said, voice low but firm. Not to apply for loans using unratified land as collateral. He paused, letting the words settle. If this plan uses my land for your loan, I will have the bank freeze every cent. A gasp escaped from someone near the front. Pam from Dolly's Diner dropped her HOA flyer into her lap. Mr. Grayson muttered something inaudible to his neighbor. Karen gripped the sides of the podium. Her eyes swept across the room, calculating. Then she smiled, sharp, thin. Then we'll see what happens when HOA penalties double, per week. A thick envelope marked HOA internal use only appeared on the Ellisons' doorstep, no return address. Ellie found it wedged between the welcome mat and the threshold, its edges curled slightly from the desert wind. The label was typed, not handwritten, and the envelope smelled faintly of lavender cleaner, like an office file pulled from a locked drawer. She turned it over. No sender. No seal. Just a small printed sticker, internal, do not copy. She stepped inside, where the dining table had become a permanent war room. Soup bowls sat beside open folders. Nora's laptop buzzed quietly, its screen filled with PDFs of HOA bylaws. A stack of printed deeds teetered next to Mark's legal pad. This just arrived, Ellie said, handing the envelope to her father. Mark peeled it open carefully. Inside, clipped together with a binder clip, were 27 sheets, expense reports, invoice copies, meeting memos with highlighted footnotes. Some had annotations in tight cursive, urgent, pending, don't share yet. Nora leaned in, pulling one page toward her. This, she murmured, is a reimbursement request for a dinner at La Rosadas, $480. For 2 people. Labeled as HOA strategy discussion. Ellie squinted. Who approved it? Karen, Nora replied. Self-approved. She picked up another page, scanning quickly. Here. Look. A landscaping expense, $3,200. But it's listed twice. Same day. Same contractor. Mark frowned. I've seen this tactic before. Duplicate billing, masked as routine costs. Ellie's phone buzzed quietly on the edge of the table. She picked it up and blinked. Unknown number. Just a single message, check the safe. Code, 1023. She didn't need to ask who it was from. Samantha had always been careful, never saying too much, never risking a full message trail. But this was different. Ellie handed the phone to Nora. It's from her. She's telling us where to look. Nora glanced at Mark. The tour event. Tomorrow night. Karen had announced a board transparency social in her weekly memo, a thinly veiled PR move. Homeowners were invited to tour the newly redecorated HOA boardhouse, complete with refreshments and neighborhood pride banners. Ellie could still hear Karen's voice in her mind, see how your dues are building a better community. The next evening, they arrived just after sundown. Fairy lights lined the walkway. Soft classical music floated through open windows. Ellie stayed close to her mother, while Mark lingered near the back, greeting neighbors with warm nods but sharp eyes. Karen was nowhere in sight. Inside, the living room had been staged like a model home, leather-bound HOA documents on a polished table, a slideshow running silently on the TV. But Ellie's attention was on the hallway beyond, where an open door revealed Karen's office. No one stopped them as they slipped in. The desk was massive, mahogany, and spotless. Ellie moved behind it and knelt, searching beneath. There. Nora pointed. Safe box. Floor mounted. Ellie tapped the keypad. 1-0-2-3, a soft click. Inside were folders, 2 USB drives, and a spiral-bound ledger with color-coded tabs. They took photos. Every page. Page after page of payments labeled as community enrichment, but clearly tied to Karen's inner circle, relatives on consulting fees, overpaid invoices to preferred vendors, personal purchases hidden as supplies. But the most damning was tucked near the back, a chart titled Loan Presentation, Adjusted Income Projection. Nora held it up. This was sent to the bank. The numbers are inflated, by nearly 80%. When they returned home, Mark laid the photos out across the table like puzzle pieces. He checked each one against the public financial summaries. Then he found it, the smoking gun. They used projected easement access to boost community asset value, he said. They claimed additional square footage to raise the loan margin. Ellie stared at him. They used our land, without permission, to borrow more. Mark nodded slowly. We're not just fighting rules anymore. This is a case of financial fraud. The HOA's newsletter boasted about upcoming renovations, just as their bank account was frozen. It arrived on pale orange paper, folded in thirds like a seasonal greeting card. Fall forward with Vista Verde, the title declared, nestled beside a clipart rake and a smiling scarecrow. Inside, bold font outlined new improvements slated for early November: pergolas, resurfaced walkways, solar path lighting. And beneath all that, a cheerful reminder: we thank our members for continued support as Vista Pathway enters its final funding phase. Mark placed the newsletter on the kitchen table, smoothing it flat beside a legal envelope addressed to Verde Credit Union. Progress, he said quietly, is only progress if it follows the rules. Outside, a gust of wind rattled dry mesquite pods across the driveway. Halloween wreaths had started appearing on doors, felt pumpkins, corn husks, battery-lit lanterns. But the lawns were thirsty. Brown patches widened across the block. The Ellisons' flower beds, once trimmed with care, now stood accused by a new citation tacked to their front gate: non-compliant foliage, $65 fine. By the next day, 2 more notices appeared, one for dust debris on the windowsill, another for unpermitted storage referencing a folding chair that had been left, briefly, under their carport. Across the street, Mr. Jackson stood by his mailbox shaking his head. "This is punishment," he muttered as Nora passed. She gave him a knowing nod and continued down the sidewalk, legal pad in hand. Her next stop was the McGowans, then the Nguyen's. By mid-afternoon, 3 neighbors had joined her at the dining room table. They brought their own stacks of papers, fines, memos, screenshots. Nora poured coffee, cleared space between Mark's laptop and Ellie's homework, and laid out a draft petition for formal audit review. She said the loan was already approved, Mrs. McGowan said, voice tight. "But I called the credit union. It's still pending." Mark looked up from his screen. "Pending is good. Pending means it can still be stopped." He had already filed a formal complaint to Verde Credit Union, flagging inconsistencies in the HOA's income projections and undeclared easement disputes. His tone in the letter had been professional, clipped, and rooted in regulation. Due to material discrepancies between HOA-provided figures and documented financial activity, I request a temporary administrative hold on all dispersal activity related to the Vista Pathway proposal. The real punch came from the attachments: photocopies of dual ledgers, annotated excerpts from HOA bylaws, and time-stamped photos of survey flags marking unapproved pathways. By Friday, a terse response arrived in his inbox. The credit union had initiated a full review, and all project-related funds were suspended until further notice. At school, Samantha passed Ellie a folded note, plain paper, no name. "There's more. I think the minutes were edited. You didn't hear it from me." Ellie read it twice, then slid it into her math book, her heart beating faster than she let on. Meanwhile, HOA pressure mounted across the neighborhood. Lawn crews hired by the board began appearing unannounced, mowing grass that didn't need cutting, taping notices to mailboxes: non-conforming edges, seasonal hazard, visual obstruction. Mr. Morales found a pink slip on his rose trellis. "Visual obstruction," he scoffed. "It's one vine." But others were less defiant. Some stayed indoors. Others whispered at the mailbox, glancing around before speaking. The silence on the street grew heavy. Then, without warning, the renovations stopped. No more flagging. No more flyers. A delivery truck carrying landscaping materials idled at the entrance to Vista Verde for nearly an hour before turning around. Inside the Ellisons' home, Mark read the notification twice: Verde Credit Union has placed a hold on the HOA's construction account, pending investigation. He set the paper down, nodded once, then looked at Nora. "Now it begins." That evening, as twilight settled and the first jack-o'-lanterns flickered to life, Karen appeared. She walked briskly down the sidewalk, heels clicking against the pavement. As she passed the Ellisons' house, she slowed, just for a moment, then stopped at the edge of their lawn. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the dusk. "You'll regret this." Karen's voice trembled behind the podium, her smile stretched too tight as reporters filled the HOA meeting room. The soft hum of camera equipment and the occasional click of a pen replaced the usual whisper of neighbors settling into their chairs. Outside, news vans idled under rows of turning maple trees. Inside, the room smelled faintly of paper coffee cups, dry air, and anticipation. Fall streamers hung in drooping arcs across the windows, some half-detached. A plastic pumpkin grinned toothlessly from the sign-in table. But no one was here for seasonal charm. Karen stood under the flickering fluorescent lights, notes in hand, her blazer perfectly tailored. She cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was steady at first, but her eyes betrayed the strain. "There have been rumors. Baseless accusations designed to divide this community. I want to assure you, Vista Verde remains fiscally sound, and all projects are in full compliance." A murmur stirred the crowd. Ellie counted 4 reporters, all seated in the back row, phones at the ready. One leaned forward when Mark Ellison rose from his chair and walked to the front, carrying a binder and a small remote. Karen's smile faltered. "I'd like to respond," Mark said calmly. "As a resident and as a loan officer assigned to review Vista Verde's financials." Karen tightened her grip on the podium. "We're not accepting public comment at this time." Judge Morales raised a hand. As per Bylaw 8.3, all members may address financial matters during an emergency meeting. Karen hesitated, lips pressed in a thin line. Mark stepped to the side of the projector and clicked. The wall screen flickered, then displayed a spreadsheet titled Quarterly HOA Report, Public Filing. He clicked again, another spreadsheet appeared, this one marked Loan Submission, Verde Credit Union. He didn't speak right away. The silence drew more eyes than a speech ever could. "The first document," Mark said, "is the financial summary sent to homeowners. The second is what the HOA submitted to the bank." He clicked once more. A red circle highlighted a difference of $82,740 in reported income. "That discrepancy alone raises serious questions," Mark continued. "Especially when paired with missing reimbursement receipts and repeat vendor invoices marked pending reconciliation." Karen stepped forward, voice rising. "You're manipulating numbers. These are draft documents." "They were labeled final," Mark replied, voice calm. "Signed by you. Dated. Delivered." Judge Morales shifted in his seat. "Where are the receipts for the August expenses?" Karen turned away from the podium, fumbling with her binder. "Those were misplaced during office renovations." Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. Ellie saw neighbors exchanging glances, confused, skeptical. Some reached for their copies of the flyer handouts. Others just stared, blinking. Then Samantha stood. She had been seated quietly beside Ellie, nearly invisible until now. Her voice was soft, but clear enough to cut through the noise. "I have something to read," she said, unfolding a printed email. Karen froze. "This is a message sent by Karen Whitmore to board members last month," Samantha said. Quote, "If we want compliance, we target the loudest dissenters first. It's how you quiet a room, start with those who ask too many questions." Silence. Then, like a slow-moving tide, the murmurs began. First disbelief, then outrage. Pam from the diner stood, her voice trembling. "You fined me for a flag on my mailbox." Mr. Grayson rose next. "You told me my hearing aid antenna was a visual hazard." Karen banged the gavel. "This meeting is out of order." Judge Morales stood. "No, Mrs. Whitmore. It is very much in order." He turned to the crowd. "I move for a formal vote of no confidence in the sitting HOA board." Hands shot up. Some slow, some immediate. Nearly every hand in the room. Karen looked out across the sea of raised arms. Her eyes landed on Samantha, who didn't move but held her gaze steady. Karen stumbled from the podium, mascara streaked. She turned to Mark and hissed, "You think this is over?" Halloween night brought porch lights, laughter, and, for the first time in weeks, no HOA citations taped to any door. Ellie stood on the porch with a thermos of cider warming her hands, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg curling through the air. All along Vista Loop, jack-o'-lanterns flickered beside potted mums. Children in homemade costumes darted from one house to the next, their giggles mixing with the gentle hum of conversation. Someone down the block had set up a speaker playing old jazz standards, and the bass line floated just soft enough not to compete with the laughter. It was the kind of night Mr. Grayson used to talk about, back before the fines and the memos. The kind of night people remembered without needing a photo. The news had spread quietly earlier that morning. Karen Whitmore had submitted her resignation. The email, signed with a simple Karen W., cited family health obligations and a need for personal renewal. But no one missed the subtext. By noon, the mailbox cluster bore a new flyer, HOA interim board announcement, with Judge Morales listed as chair and Nora Ellison as legal advisor. Mark had read it with a dry chuckle. No more policy memos disguised as warnings. Now, on this crisp October night, he and Nora sat side by side on the porch, a bowl of candy between them and matching mugs in hand. Mark watched a boy in a dinosaur hoodie toddle up the driveway and shouted to his father, "No ghosts here, just good snacks." Nora smiled. It's strange how quickly peace feels normal again. Mark nodded. This isn't about winning. It's about reclaiming where we live. Just then, Ellie opened the front door to find Samantha standing there in a navy sweater, a pie tin cradled in her arms. "I made this," she said. "Okay, my aunt helped, but still." Ellie stepped aside. "Come in. We've got cider." Samantha hesitated, then crossed the threshold for the first time in weeks. "Mom left yesterday," she said quietly. "She's in Scottsdale now. Said she needed a fresh start." Ellie poured 2 mugs and handed one over. "Are you staying with your aunt?" "For now." Samantha set the pie on the kitchen counter, then added, "I'm finishing the semester here." "I didn't want to leave." They stood in silence for a moment. Ellie finally spoke. "You helped. Even if it was quiet." Samantha smiled faintly. "It was the only way I knew how." Later, the girls joined the block party as dusk settled in. Ellie helped string lanterns across the porch beams while Samantha untangled twine beside her. Mr. Grayson, walking by with a tray of caramel apples, called out, "Now that's how Vista Verde should look." People milled around folding tables laden with crockpots, apple crisps, paper cups of cider. Mrs. Patel handed out candied pecans. Even the stoic Nguyen's had lit their front walkway with paper lanterns. For the first time in weeks, no one whispered about violations or fines. They just talked. Ellie returned to the porch steps as the first stars blinked on overhead. She sat with her cider, breathing in the cool night. Samantha waved from the lawn, her face lit by the lantern glow. Cars lined both sides of the street. Kids ran past with glow sticks and pillowcases full of candy. A group of neighbors laughed over a game of cornhole near the cul-de-sac. And from somewhere nearby, a guitar strummed a few off-key chords before finding its rhythm. For the first time, Vista Verde feels like home again. On a street once weighed down by silence and citations, Halloween brought back porch lights, laughter, and the scent of warm cider, simple things that felt like freedom. The neighbors didn't just take back their lawns, they reclaimed their right to fairness, respect, and quiet dignity. Rules, when weaponized, can fracture a community, but when challenged with truth and unity, they can be rewritten. Like a lantern lit on a front porch after a long night, one voice standing firm can guide many back home. And perhaps, in every neighborhood, it starts with someone who dares to say, "This isn't right."